Good afternoon to all of you here and all of you watching via webcast. And thank you for your interest in today's report. Merci de votre intérêt pour le rapport d'aujourd'hui. This investigation uncovered serious problems in the way the Ministry of Transportation communicates with drivers whose licenses are suspended for unpaid fines. What we found was that its systems are complex and cumbersome, and its customer service is lacking, generating hundreds of complaints to our office. Cette enquête a révélé de graves problèmes dans la façon dont le Ministère des Transports communique avec les conducteurs, dont le permis de conduire est suspendu en raison d'amendes impayées. Nous avons constaté que les systèmes du ministère sont complexes et lourds, et que son service à la clientèle n'est pas à la hauteur, ce qui donne lieu à des centaines de plaintes à notre bureau. But perhaps the best way to understand these issues is to put yourself in the shoes of the drivers whose stories we tell in this report. Imagine getting a ticket for a traffic offense, like having an obstructed license plate, not wearing a seatbelt, or failing to signal a turn, and paying that fine, only to find out months or years later that your driver's license was suspended because you did not pay a reinstatement fee. Imagine you never received notice that your license was suspended or canceled, which means you've unknowingly been driving with an invalid license. And then imagine finding out that the only way that you can get your license back is to start from scratch, to requalify as a driver. And you may not have insurance coverage if you've been in an accident. Now you have to go through the graduated licensing program. You may have been driving for 30 years, but because your license was canceled for more than 3 years, you have to retake and pay for the same vision, knowledge, and road tests that novice drivers take. So we heard from many drivers in this situation, more than 200 in the past 5 years. And in fact, every year, about 90,000 Ontario drivers have their licenses suspended for unpaid fines. And in 2017, an estimated 5,000 of the notices that were mailed to them were returned to the ministry, undelivered. My office has alerted the ministry to several of these issues for years, and it did make some changes. But complaints continued. So last year I decided to launch a systemic investigation in the interest of finding constructive solutions. One key problem that we found was the ministry's reliance on regular mail. Once we prompted the ministry to look more closely, it determined that thousands of the suspension notices that are sent to drivers are returned undelivered every year. But the ministry doesn't track returned mail, so it has no record of which drivers didn't get the notices. Even when the system works as intended, we found it is fundamentally flawed. First, drivers are only warned that they may have their license suspended if they don't pay the fine, not that it will happen. Second, suspension notices are actually mailed on the same day that they take effect. That means many people are unwittingly driving with a suspended license during the time that their notice is in the mail. There is no advance notice or grace period, as there is in many provinces. By the time they receive it, it is a fait accompli, and they must pay a reinstatement fee to restore their license. On top of all this, the forms that the ministry sends are just plain confusing. You might receive a notice of outstanding licensing requirements, even though you have no outstanding requirements at all. And many of the people that we spoke to had paid their traffic fines, but their licenses were canceled because they failed to pay the $198 license reinstatement fee because they just weren't aware of it. And when they tried to complain or sort things out with the ministry or Service Ontario, many of them got a runaround or confusing information or no information at all. One woman who struggled to pay her reinstatement fee was crushed to learn that she still couldn't get her license back until she paid hundreds more dollars for graduated licensing tests. As she put it, that's a pretty mean trick. What we found could be summed up as another example of segmented bureaucracy. Although the municipal courts, the Ministry of Transportation, the Ministry of the Attorney General, and Service Ontario are ostensibly partners, the information that they share with one another and the public is limited. So my recommendations encourage them to establish a real one-stop shop where drivers can have all their questions answered and problems resolved. These are precisely the type of bureaucratic issues that my office was designed to address. We can look into confusing systems with fresh eyes and propose constructive solutions for the benefit of drivers and public servants alike. In this case, we identified several opportunities for the ministry to focus on customer service principles and to really leverage technology, such as using email or text messages to notify suspended drivers, creating an online portal to provide drivers with information about their license status, and recording phone inquiries for quality assurance purposes. Je suis heureux de dire que le ministère a déjà entrepris de travailler à la plupart de mes 42 recommandations. Et je suis satisfait de la réponse du ministère et je surveillerai toute question en suspens à mesure qu'il apporte ses améliorations. So I'm pleased to say that the ministry has already started to work on most of my 42 recommendations. I am satisfied with the ministry's response so far, and I will monitor any outstanding issues as it implements these improvements. Et donc, il me fera plaisir de prendre vos questions. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Mr. Dubé, were you surprised that 5,000 a year these envelopes would presumably be coming back to the MTO's offices, and they just sit in a stack at the office? I mean,
yeah, and they're eventually destroyed, so there's no tracking. Whereas in Alberta, there's a barcode, and they scan the barcode so they can find out who has not gotten the notices. So, it's troubling. 90,000 drivers a year in Ontario are suspended for unpaid fines. 40,000 of those are suspended for not paying the reinstatement fee. So that means they paid the fine, right? They did what they had to do to take care of the fine. So it means that while we can't substantiate all the claims that they didn't get the notices, obviously there's at least 5,000 that we can know didn't get the notices. So this is really a problem for individuals, for drivers, and potentially for employers and citizens alike, because if that many people, if tens of thousands of people are driving with invalid licenses and maybe uninsured, that's a real concern for all of us. So we're happy to see the ministry addressing this.
I've never had my license suspended, but where is this reinstatement fee laid out, or where is it shown to people? Is it just some?
So it's a notice that they get once. Yeah, once the suspension is once the license is suspended, there's a notice that's sent out, and there's information about the reinstatement fee there. But as as we allude to, if they don't get that notice, they don't know.
But it doesn't say anywhere else on the fine, or like if you're suspended, it doesn't say anywhere else on the ticket?
Not when you get the original ticket. It just tells you that you may be suspended. So obviously the reinstatement fee doesn't apply until you've been suspended. And so when you get the original ticket in your hand, there's no mention of a reinstatement fee.
Was your office able to help any of these people out and fast track them through the system at all?
Well, not so much fast track the system, but we've got the ministry and we've got Service Ontario looking at their procedures, and they've already started enhancing their communications. And I mean, they started changing the language. I mean, at one time, you would get a notice of reinstatement, which did not necessarily mean you're being reinstated. Then they changed the language to a notice of outstanding requirements. And when you get that, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have outstanding requirements. So this is the kind of thing that we're hoping they start with is actually the language, because really it comes down to fairness. Fairness means you're entitled to clear information, you're entitled to timely information. Another issue that we raised was that some of the suspension notices are not sent out until they take effect, and so you're already suspended before you get the notice. So this is the kind of thing that we deal with all the time, and we can help organizations and public sector institutions improve their systems and their service to Ontarians.
And how far back did your investigation go?
Well, we've been looking at the issue for a few years now, but I don't know if we had a particular time frame on it, but we got 107 new complaints after we announced the investigation. So obviously we looked at those, but we already had a couple hundred complaints in the system.
You looked at various provinces throughout the country, and some send out notices by a registered mail and so on, and some have a greater grace period. Would you say that Ontario has the most kind of gaps in the system of the provinces that you looked at?
No, I wouldn't say the most. I mean, different provinces have different systems, for dealing with unpaid fines. But what we do is look at best practices. And so to ensure that our recommendations are feasible and doable, we look to best practices. So we always draw on what other jurisdictions are doing to point to those best practices.
And you mentioned that some of the recommendations that you made, they have already been taken up by the ministry. Have you had a chance to hear about what kind of impact some of those recommendations are having so far?
Well, not really. I mean, we're not getting. I'm not aware of people coming to us saying things are working better yet, but we'll see if the complaints go down, and we'll see how we intend to monitor this as we do with every report and all sets of recommendations. We monitor them going forward, so we'll see. Do complaints go down? Are more issues getting resolved more quickly? We typically continue to get complaints after we issue a report, but we see if the processes are improved and the service is improved, we see those issues getting resolved a lot quicker as the new measures are being implemented. So we'll be keeping an eye on that.
Concrètement, combien de temps s'écoule entre le moment où une personne obtient la contravention? Je comprends qu'il y a 15 jours pour soit la payer, soit la contester, mais après, combien de temps il s'écoule entre ce moment-là et le moment où la suspension entre en effet?
Ça peut dépendre. Ça peut dépendre, puis ça varie. Nous avons constaté dans certains cas que c'était plus qu'une année que la personne a été en effet suspendue, mais que l'avis a été envoyé. Puis personne n'a été en mesure de nous expliquer pourquoi il y a eu un délai si important. Donc ça varie, ça peut varier d'un cas à l'autre.
C'est quoi les conséquences pour la population générale qu'il y a des gens qui conduisent sans permis sans le savoir?
Si vous êtes un employeur, ça peut avoir des conséquences assez graves parce que si votre employé n'est pas assuré. Pour les autres conducteurs, les autres gens sur la rue, si vous êtes impliqué dans un accident avec ces gens-là qui n'ont pas un permis de conduire valide, qui sont en fait sans assurance, ça peut réduire le montant d'argent que vous pouvez recevoir en dommages et intérêts. Donc, c'est dans l'intérêt de tout le monde de régler ce problème.
Vous avez plusieurs recommandations. Évidemment, il y en a qui vont prendre du temps à mettre en place. S'il y en avait quelques-unes qu'on pouvait mettre en place rapidement pour peut-être libérer le système, ce serait lesquelles?
La communication, la clarité des communications puis les mots qui sont envoyés dans les avis. Mais je pense qu'il faut d'abord viser la technologie aussitôt que possible, de trouver des solutions, employer la technologie pour améliorer le service et les systèmes.
Do you have a breakdown of, are there certain areas that were harder hit by this situation than others?
In geographic areas? I'm not aware of that. We can look into it, but I'm not aware of it. We can ask and find out if we have that information at the office, but I'm not sure.
And which of the 42 recommendations have already taken effect?
Well, they're already working on language and clarity of information. They're already examining systems. They're looking at recording phone calls, that type of thing. So there's already movement on some of these issues, and we're happy to see that. But we'll keep an eye on this. We'll monitor it, and as we typically do, we ask for 6-month report backs, and so we are in constant communication with the ministry as we move forward.
Now, they said they're going to accept 38 of the 42. Mm-hmm. What were the 4 that they wouldn't accept, and what?
Well, there are 2 that are being studied a little bit further, but I don't anticipate any problems. And the other one was this having discretion for staff to reinstate licenses for, I can't remember what the circumstances were, but for exceptional circumstances, having that discretion to reinstate the license. And they say that that's already in place, and that's being done. So there's nothing contentious there. They agree in principle with everything that we've recommended.
And why did it take so long? I mean, you started this in May 2017. We had the stories back in March 2017, and we're here at September 2018. Why did it take so long?
Well, we had to talk to a lot of people. We had an enormous amount of documentation to go through. It's actually the first time that we've used e-discovery in the assessment of documentation in an investigation. We spoke to, I think there was over 70 interviews, and so it takes time. A lot of players in this. I mean, when you're talking to municipal courts, the Attorney General, Ministry of Transportation, Service Ontario, it's more important for us to be thorough and get it right than to be quick.
So this had nothing to do with the change in government or anything like that?
No.
Do any of the drivers have recourse? Can they go back now with your report in hand and go, look, I wasn't really treated fairly? Or is it they were just part of the problem and it's just improvements moving forward?
Well, it'll depend on some of the circumstances. I mean, one of the issues that's raised in the recommendations is that in exceptional circumstances, that they be able to reinstate these licenses without having to go through the graduated license program. So that'll depend on the evidence that they present in the case that they make.
But people can't go and recoup any of the costs or anything. It's too late for them.
No.
Est-ce que le frais de 198 $ est raisonnable? Parce que vous mentionnez un cas d'une personne qui avait une contravention de 35 $. Est-ce que c'est raisonnable de payer 198 $ pour le
Question intéressante parce qu'au début, le frais de 188 $ a été conçu pour couvrir les frais de poste recommandé. Et éventuellement, le ministère a décidé de ne plus envoyer les avis par poste recommandé, mais par poste ordinaire ou courrier régulier. Donc, j'imagine que ça génère un peu de revenus pour le ministère. Donc, c'est comme ça que ça a été conçu, mais le montant, le frais demeure le même si les avis ne sont plus envoyés par poste recommandé.
Il n'y a pas de recommandation qui touche ce montant.
Non.
Was there any lines cut as far as ethnicity? Was it mostly sort of maybe ethnic groups that maybe didn't English wasn't their first language, or it wasn't explained to them, or did you see any of that sort of stuff? Or was
No,
it
we
across the
didn't.
board?
We didn't break it down in that way. No, that was not a focus of the investigation. Basically, it came down to systems and procedures, as is so typically the case, breaking down and not finding fairness in the way that things are implemented.
They still using Canada Post?
Yes. And one of the issues was, I mean, people registered a mailing address and a residential address, and they send it to the residential address even though there is a mailing address indicated, which is where people get their mail. So that's something that they're addressing as well.
Are you surprised that the sticker renewal and the driver's license renewal, I mean, you do your sticker every 1 or 2 years, you do your driver's license every 5 years,
Yeah.
but they seem to be like parallel notification systems
Yeah.
at the MTO.
Yeah, whereas in some provinces, and I think Alberta is one of them, where when you go to renew the sticker, if that fine is outstanding or the reinstatement fee is outstanding, you'll be notified then, and you can't. So, I mean, it's a policy decision that they've come up with, and different provinces have different rules, but